or 1919, I think it was, that at that conference, the British and the American delegations basically came into agreement on a new kind of worldview that was popular amongst people like the Round Table Group, certainly, and in various publications that connected to them, which was internationalism, which was beginning to surmount the limitedness, the smallness of nations. And those people have had their way in Britain and America for the last, ever since, I think, for the last century. But that's not like, if so, like that. How is that the British? How is that Britain? It's certain people. It's people like, it's the sort of people who Chatham House will host at their conferences and stuff. But internationalism rather than nationalism, basically. It's represented by people who support the EU in Britain, right? The idea that you need to step out of the smallness of the nation and be part of something greater. And also, just very, very strongly, after the First War, and especially after the Second War, the idea that nations, the existence of nations, causes war, right? So it's what you could call the left, at least in international relations. It's not our country. It's not what most people believe. It's not even what the whole establishment believes. When it comes to the Round Table Group, like that was quite a secret society, although not so secret that we don't know about it. But that's all that I think. To answer your question, the counter is take on their specific claims and prove them wrong. Show all the other things that could not be true but are, if their theory was correct. And I can't remember what the third one was. Basically, like put forward better work that does address these phenomena, but rationally and according to the evidence. I think that's the only way to deal with it.
One of the things he claims in here is that the historian Andrew Roberts, who's like a kind of he's kind of a figure a bit like Niall Ferguson, who also went to LSE, incidentally. Andrew Roberts, right? He mentions in his 2006 book, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples Since 1900, Roberts breezily suggests that America might be better off under a monarchy. A monarchical government would have spared us the national trauma of Watergate, he argues. A monarch would have stepped in and fired Nixon, just as Elizabeth II fired Australian Prime Minister Gough Whitlam in 1975. No need for any democratic process. Roberts fails to consider how such a royal intervention might have gone over with the silent majority of Americans who voted for Nixon and supported him. The bottom line is, Trump sought to make America great again, MAGA, by restoring our independence and self-sufficiency. The Council of Foreign Relations seeks to make America British again, MABA. It's that simple. If Trump taught us anything, it's that MAGA and MABA don't mix. The instant we get a president who stands up for American sovereignty, the British go loco, pushing our country to the brink of civil war. It's clear that we cannot be great and British at the same time. We must choose one or the other, he says. Well, I happen to look up the page reference that he gives to Andrew Roberts talking in this book. What he's saying is, in this section of the book, not that America should have a monarchy, but that if America didn't have to have an impeachment to remove someone who was elected, like in this country, if there's a scandal, right, the PM can resign and the king can select another prime minister. Okay, now you don't actually have to have a king for that mechanism to take place. Other countries, like in Italy, for example, they've got a president and a prime minister, don't they? And they can have a similar thing where, there are mechanisms in place to remove a leader without having to go through the whole rigmarole of the impeachment process. And what he's saying is that America's self-image and his standing could have been avoided if the United States had a constitution like Britain's, which did not require an impeachment to remove an elected leader. He's not saying, we need to make America British, or we need to, he's just saying, like, there are some American Constitution that lead to some problem. Like, it's quite difficult to remove the president, basically, other than by this impeachment process. So I'm just saying, like, I don't believe that Andrew Roberts is part of some like global conspiracy to reconstitute the British Empire going back to Cecil Rhodes. But if you read this article, it sounds like Andrew Roberts is part of some plan. Well, he's just a historian.
And also he's part of a conspiracy, but every now and then he just lets on what the plan is in public, in a book, right? but then goes back to operating secretly, I guess, right?
Yeah, in a mainstream book that was reviewed everywhere, you know.
I would like to, let me address the bit about Rhodes as well. Rhodes, I believe, did say that it would be good if America was reabsorbed into the British Empire. He said that in the 1870s. And I think he drew together a few people, a few initial sort of conspirators, you could say, like the Rhodes Circle, which sort of descended into the Milner Circle and the Cecil Circle, two different, or the Milner group and the Cecil group, but that's more detail. But yeah, like the Rhodes did have a vision where America sort of rejoined the British Empire, but that's all. It's just like some guy's idea, and then he died, and it just didn't happen. I mean, so what? Like, so they just he made this sort of this grand utterance like decades before, 30 years before the Round Table Society was founded. There's no evidence that anything was done about it, because what could be done? America was already getting really powerful by the turn of the century. And also just hardly anyone else was on side, even in Britain, even in his circle, hardly anyone else thought it was a good idea or that it could be done or anything. This is nonsense. There was also, around the same time, the first few people he got together, one of them was, I think, William Stead, a journalist, and a couple of others. One of them said the opposite. Wouldn't it be good if Britain became a state of the USA? And that idea was as important to this circle, this sort of conspiratorial circle, as the other way around. So they're just mooting ideas. That's all it was. And yeah, the Round Table was sort of fairly secretive. That was, as I say, founded like decades later, and never had so this is all laid out in The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley, who is like much more of a proper historian. He just lays out that he goes on at great length about all the different ideas they had and the debates they had among themselves. There's no evidence that they did anything to bring America back into the empire. None at all. And the CFR is not, as I say, it's not a branch of the Chatham House. It was an idea founded by people who had the same sort of view of the world as those who founded Chatham House a year earlier. That's all it is. So they met, the English and the American delegations, at the Paris Peace Conference. They began to agree that nations cause war, that we need to move beyond it, we need to have something more like global governance or whatever. And they separately, but in friendship and communication with each other, they separately founded those two organizations. And they are kind of partner organizations. They do work together, but it's not the British. It's the internationalists in both countries. That's what it is.
But I mean, okay, let's just even pretend, let's pretend that the CFR, the CFR was actually set up by Woodrow Wilson, right, during the First World War. I believe that's the case, right?
No, it was just after. It was about 1920, I think. It was
right. Okay. So and because another one of his claims is that foreign affairs, which is actually something I consult quite a lot to see, what the regime is thinking, quote unquote. He also claims that foreign affairs is like secretly a British magazine
it's the CFR's magazine.
Right. It's CFR's magazine, right?
Yeah.
But like the idea that this body, the Council on Foreign Relations, has it stayed like a Wilsonian, strictly to the 14 points, and has it stayed as that all the way through?
No,
I'm having a look at its board now. Its chair is a guy called David Rubenstein. Is David Rubenstein like secretly working for the British? Like, who is this guy?
Like, if he is, show some damned evidence. No, of course not. My understanding of the CFR is this: that it was set up in the first place mainly by the Morgans, also by the Rockefellers, who then grew in power. But the Morgans primarily, also the Lazard Brothers Investment Bank, and the Kuhn Loeb Company Investment Bank, which was Jacob Schiff's company. But he wasn't on. I don't think he was on the CFR. It's always just been sort of a finance, bankers often adopt globalist ideas. Well, I say often, they began around this time, and more so through the last century. Bankers developed the ideas that we now call globalism, and it was as far as I understand, it was George Ball, I think, who we talked about in one of the a couple of the episodes of Curtis. George Ball was a Rockefeller man, basically had loads of various appointments in Rockefeller-controlled institutions that treat him as a Rockefeller guy. He began to call himself and his friends and comrades the new globalists in, I think, the late 60s or early 70s. So Yeah, well, and the Lehman Brothers Bank was involved. So it was like investment bankers, especially big, massive money people. They formed the CFR basically to promote the worldview, the view of international relations, especially that suited them, that suited their business interests, and they promoted it. And obviously they could buy a lot of politicians and buy a lot of media. I mean, I could go on forever about this, but I mean, just one instant, they basically created the idea of the EU. And they also created the Marshall Plan, which really slots into the EU thing. Not the European Union as founded in '92, but I mean European Union, one organisation to unify the nations of Europe that wasn't called the EU until the '90s, right? It was roughly their idea, and they began to seed it, especially in the media in the '40s. This is provable, pretty much. I can prove this. And New York Times, the Washington Post, all of their guys, either their editors or their owners, Christian Science Monitor was another one, I think, like various other major newspapers in America, maybe the LA Times, whatever. Their editors or owners or both, or like their senior journalists, they're all on the CFR, and they all coordinate what stories they're going to put out, especially about arranging the world. And obviously, America was dictating basically world affairs in the 40s and 50s, I would say. It's nothing to do with the British. It's the interests of the Morgans, Rockefellers, and their kind of people, their kind of politicians. It's elite financiers mostly and industrialists.
But I mean, let's just pretend the CFR. I mean, I can see here from their page that large amounts of the Eisenhower administration and the LBJ's administration and Kennedy's administration and Truman's were all part of this CFR. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the same would probably be true of Chatham House here because it's an elite institution, right? But has America had an identical foreign policy through all those different presidents? Has it had a continuous foreign policy from Eisenhower to now?
Not even that, let alone a British-oriented one. Yeah, no, they haven't. Of course not. There is probably more continuity in foreign policy than in other areas, but still, no. I mean, John Kennedy was not given orders by the CFR.
I mean, JFK was secretly working for the British, was he? Or Eisenhower was? or George Kennan, or any of these people? I mean, or Kissinger. I mean, I've noticed Kissinger is all over their literature. Is like Henry Kissinger secretly a British agent all this time? I mean,
of course not. They could cite. Here's a little tidbit of evidence they could select and use. Right. After the CFR, members of the CFR mainly founded the Trilateral Commission as well, which is also, like the CFR does follow Chatham House rules, that's true. Trilateral Commission, I think, is even more or fairly tight-lipped. Like they report what was said, but not who said it. That's Chatham House rules, right? Trilateral Commission was founded in the 70s by Zbigniew Brzezinski, notorious ZBIG, and Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller, right? So very elite, very, very wealthy, powerful figures. And the Trilateral Commission now includes, and it is quite secretive, and it is globalist, and it is anti-populist. It's quite interesting. But Keir Starmer is or was on the Trilateral Commission, so they could say that actually the Trilateral Commission, the real master is Keir Starmer, maybe. But it's not. He's just a chump who's fucking taking orders from the other side of the Atlantic, obviously. Or not even taking orders. He's more stupid. Do you know what I mean? Like his stance on Russia, that's not serving either British or American interests. That's just serving like.
How do they explain away all of the? I mean, let's just take the neocons as one example, right? The George W. Bush, the Dick Cheney, like these people were all secretly working for the British all this time, when they did like Iraq and Afghanistan, and like how does this? My problem, Horus, is that this theory has absolutely no explanatory power whatsoever. It just makes no sense.
No, it doesn't.
But none of these events that have happened serve, or in any obvious way serve, quote unquote British interests, or this long-term plan of Cecil Rhodes's to bring America back into the empire. And I noticed, by the way, that this guy, when Trump was open to rejoining the Commonwealth, they were like, a lot of them were like, "I told you so," or "This is 5D chess." I mean, like, is it, or is it just some? It's obviously nothing. It drives me nuts. Like in the world of these people, King Charles, right? Charles Windsor is actually like some Svengali mastermind in all of this. And he's
And
just like, anyway, go on, Horace.
well, no, I assume they think that the Commonwealth is just pretending to be unimportant and powerless, right? Because what does the Commonwealth do? And America, like all that Trump said was that we might want to start attending the meetings or something, wasn't it? It was like we want to be like an associate observer or something. It's nothing. It doesn't put America under British control. It's ridiculous. Like what other countries are in the Commonwealth, like Ghana or like Kenya or something? Are they under British control? Let alone America. It's just absurd.